Hello students, welcome to IAS by Heart. Welcome to the Prelims High series. This is the current affairs class and this is the 5th class. If you haven't watched our 4 classes video, kindly check the link in the description box below. Without further delay, let's get into the class. The first question is from Polity section. Consider the following statements regarding the 10th schedule of the Indian Constitution. We know that this schedule deals with the anti-defection law. This was inserted in the Constitution in the 42nd Amendment Act, which lays down the process by which legislators may be disqualified on the grounds of defection. The Supreme Court held that the decision of the Speaker is final on the question of disqualification. The third statement says the law allows a party to merge with or into another party, provided that at least 1/3 of its legislators are in favor of the merger. Which of the statements are incorrect? Let's see. All the statements are incorrect. Let's see the explanation. 10th schedule was inserted in 1985 by the 52nd Amendment Act, not the 42nd one. Remember this. This was inserted in only 1985 by the 52nd Amendment Act. This lays down the process by which legislators may be disqualified on the grounds of defection by the presiding officer, let it be the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly or the Parliament, based on the petition by any other member. This law applies both to the Parliament and the state assemblies. The decision on the question to disqualification is referred to the chairman or the Speaker of such house. Initially, the law stated that the decision of the presiding officer is not subjected to judicial review. In 1992, Supreme Court held that you can allow appeals against the presiding officer's decision in the High Court and Supreme Court, meaning the decision of the Speaker is prone to judicial review. It is not immune from that. However, it held that there may not be any judicial intervention until the presiding officer gives his order. But once the order is given, it can be challenged in Supreme Court or High Court. Moving on, what are the grounds of disqualification? If a member of a house belonging to a political party voluntarily gives up the membership, then he can be disqualified. Next, if he votes or does not vote in the legislature, which is contrary to the directions of his political party, then also he can be disqualified. However, if the member has taken prior permission from the party within 15 days, then he can be not disqualified. Moving on, the independent candidate, if he joins a political party, it becomes a ground for disqualification. Last one is a nominated member joins a party after 6 months, because he should join a political party within 6 months. If he joins after 6 months, he becomes disqualified, and if an independent candidate joins a political party, he also becomes disqualified. Now, what are the exceptions? Legislators may change their party without the risk of disqualification in certain circumstances. What are they? The law allows the party to merge with or into another party, provided at least 2/3 of its members. In the question, it was given as 1/3. 2/3 of the members are in favor of the merger. In such a scenario, neither the members who decide to merge nor the ones who stay will face disqualification. These are the exceptions given. I hope now you have a clearer idea about the disqualification of members. Now let's move on to the next question. This is from Economy. With a view to provide a greater measure of protection to depositors, the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation has raised the limit of insurance cover for depositors up to 5 lakh. This is the factual statement. In this regard, consider the following statements. Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation is wholly owned subsidiary of RBI. Now the next statement says the depositor holding more than 5 lakh in their account have no legal remedy in case of the collapse of the bank. Next one, it will not have any impact on the operating expenses of the bank. This you can straight away eliminate, because in the question itself it is given that the insurance has been raised to 5 lakh. Obviously, from whatever amount it was, now it is raised to 5 lakh. So surely this will have an impact on the operating expenses of the bank. So which is the correct statement? Only 1 and 2 is correct. As I said before, this will surely have an impact on the operating expense of the banks. Let's look at the explanation. With a view to provide greater measure of protection, Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation, which is the wholly owned subsidiary of RBI, raised the limit. It was raised from 1 lakh to 5 lakh per depositor. This came in effect from February of this year. Therefore, what does this mean? When a bank collapses, depositors will get 5 lakh from the corporation. However, now depositors holding more than 5 lakh in their account have no legal remedy in case of collapse of the bank. Meaning if you have 25 lakhs or even 5 crore, the depositor will only get 5 lakhs. This is a problem because if you have more amount in your account, you will get only 5 lakh. In case if you had only 6 lakhs in your account, then the bank got collapsed, you will get 5 lakh reimbursed. That's what this says. Now, given the size of insured deposits is likely to increase, this will increase the operating expenses and it will be negative for their profitability because they are not able to pass it on to the bank customers. As I said before, because it is increased from 1 lakh to 5 lakhs now the bank have to provide more insurance to the account holders. Therefore, the operating expenses will increase. Let's move on to the next question. This is from International Relations. Consider the following statements regarding Nuclear Energy Agency. This is quite new. This is an intergovernmental agency organized under the NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group. This is statement 1. Second statement says it assists member countries in maintaining and further developing safe, environmentally friendly and economical use of nuclear energy, and this is for peaceful purposes. Let's see the correct answer. It is only 2 because Nuclear Energy Agency is an intergovernmental agency. It is under the framework of OECD. It is not under NSG. It has nothing to do with NSG in fact. Let's look more about this. It facilitates cooperation among countries with advanced nuclear technology infrastructures. And it helps to excel in nuclear safety, technology, science, environment and law. The headquarters of NEA is in Paris, France. These are the membership countries in Europe. As we know, OECD consists of 37 member countries and NEA consists of 33 countries. 33 countries. Countries except Argentina, Romania, Russia. These countries are not members of OECD but they are member of Nuclear Energy Agency. Kindly pause the video and have a look at what are the members of NEA. Unfortunately, India is not a member. Now, moving on. What is the aim of NEA? It aims to assist the member countries in development through international cooperation, scientific and technological legal basis for exploring of nuclear energy. Together, these countries account for almost 82% of the world's installed nuclear capacity, meaning these 33 countries contribute to 82% of the installed nuclear energy. This nuclear power accounts for 1/5 of the electricity produced. In these 33 countries, electricity is produced from various sources like hydroelectricity, wind energy, etc. Nuclear power contributes to 1/5. NEA works closely with the International Atomic Energy Agency. We know that is headquartered in Vienna, and it is also an agency of UN. Now, as we saw, this is by OECD. Let's know more about this OECD. OECD is an intergovernmental economic organization and it aims to stimulate economic progress and world trade. You have to remember all these OECD members are high income economies. Therefore, their HDI will be more, and mostly these countries are developed countries. This was founded in 1961 and headquarters is Paris, France. The total members are 37. These are the members. Pause the video and have a look at it. The countries which are highlighted are members of OECD, but they do not form the members of Nuclear Energy Agency, which we just saw. Now, India is not a member of OECD, but it is a key economic partner. What are the various important reports and indices released by OECD? Government at a Glance report, International Migration Outlook, and Better Life Index. These are the important reports and indices released by OECD. Now, let's move on to the next question, which is from internal security, juice jacking. This term is recently seen in news. What is related to? ATM card skimming technique to clone credit or debit cards to withdraw money. Next option, cyber attack which alters the communication between two users. Third one, cyber attack through disguised email. Cyber attack during mobile charging process. This question is asked because this term is nowhere related to what you think when you first hear it. The correct answer is cyber attack during the mobile charging process. This was in news because State Bank of India publicly issued a warning of juice jacking. What is juice jacking? It is attack carried out by hackers through USB charging cable. So how does it work? When a user plugs in the charging cable in his mobile charging port and connects to any of the rigged charging station. Here the charging stations are rigged or hacked in public spaces such as in airport, train station, hotel, cafe, etc. This will give a backdoor entry to hackers to get into your mobile or laptop and compromise the device. This charging port is used for data transfer over USB, and this is the main cause of concern. What will happen? The hackers can install a malware, steal the user data, asking for ransom in exchange of access to personal data. Even financial account is under threat because it can be hijacked by the hackers. So people should refrain from using the public charging portals. You can use authorized or branded power bank to charge your mobile phones or laptops in public places. Now moving on, the next question is from environmental sector. Consider the following statement regarding turtles. A first of its kind rehabilitation center for freshwater turtles will be set up in Odisha, which will act as a home to sick and severely injured turtles. This is because a lot of turtles are getting caught or affected in the fisherman's net or by eating plastics, etc. The mortality rate of the turtles has gone high, and many of the turtles are being rescued from smugglers. The next statement says, turtles play a significant role by controlling the fish population and controlling aquatic plants and weeds. Turtles have come under serious threat primarily for food and pet trade. Let's see which of the statement is correct. Only 2 and 3 is correct because this is not set up in Odisha, this is set up in Bihar. Let's look at the explanation. A first of its kind rehabilitation center for freshwater turtles will be inaugurated in Bihar's Bangalpur Forest Division. What is the need for this? Because several turtles were found severely wounded and sick when rescued from smugglers. Eastern Bihar, here in Bihar, Eastern Bihar you can see Bangalpur. Why is this? Because this has inflow of rivers like Ganga, Son, Gandak, Kosi, etc. So there is a lot of fresh water. Therefore, the number of turtles in this Bangalpur plain is very much high. Therefore, this becomes an ideal place to set up a rehabilitation center for freshwater turtles. Why is Eastern Bihar an ideal location? Because here the flow of water in the Ganga is ample. According to environmentalists, turtles play a very significant role in the ecosystem because they act as scavengers for dead organic materials and deceased fish. It controls the fish population and act as predators to control the aquatic plants and weeds. And turtles are also indicators of healthy aquatic systems. If a river body is polluted, you cannot find turtles in that. Therefore, these become indicators of healthy ecosystems. What are the threats? mainly due to habitat fragmentation and loss through construction of dams and barrages, pollution, illegal poaching, accidental drowning through fishing nets, and threats to their nesting habitats. Because olive ridleys, they usually come and nest in the coast, and then when the hatchlings hatch, they get into the water. If there is threat to their nesting habitats, obviously the population will decline. This report was jointly prepared by the National Mission for Clean Ganga and Wildlife Institute of India. Now moving on, turtles have come under serious threat primarily for major reasons are for food. Because people believe that turtle meat gives energy boost and keeps various diseases away. Because of this, the major threat is for food and for pet trade. Many turtles like Assam roof turtles and river terrapin are in critically endangered category. And in Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, there are various schedules, almost 5 schedules, and turtles are placed in Schedule 1. This tells us the importance of these species. Now moving on, the next question is from Science and Technology. Xenobots. Recently seen in news is AI based supercomputer, India's first humanoid robot, world's first living robots, half humanoid robot. The correct answer is, unbelievably, it's world's first living robots. Let's know more detail about this. In US, scientists have created the world's first living machines. That is tiny robots. These are only just 1 millimeter width. They are built from the cells of an African clawed frog that can move around on their own. They have named these millimeter wide robots as xenobots, after the species of aquatic frog found across sub-Saharan Africa. The frog name is Xenopus laevis. These scientists have repurposed the living cells scraped from frogs' embryos and assembled them into entirely new life forms. Therefore, these robots are entirely made of organic cellular material. Usually, we know that robots are made of plastic or metal, but this robots is the first time these are made from organic materials. These xenobots can move towards a target. Since they are very small, they can move toward a target and they can pick up a payload like medicine that needs to be carried to a specific place inside a patient. For example, these robots can be allowed to move inside an artery or a vein so that it can place the medicine exactly at that point. And these robots also have another power of healing themselves after being cut. Many useful applications of these robots include searching out nasty compounds or radioactive contamination, gathering microplastic in the oceans, and traveling in arteries to scrape out plaque or tumor or anything. So these are the applications of this. In science and technology subject, if there is anything that is discovered or invented for the first time, it becomes very important. Hence, these xenobots are important. Let's move on to the next topic, which is from social issues. Consider the following statements. India's population growth rate peaked between 1961 and 1971 and has been falling since 1971. In the last 2 decades, total fertility rate in rural areas remains higher than in urban areas, and it has been declining at a faster rate than latter. Meaning, the declining of total fertility rate is more in rural than in urban, but the decline is more in rural than in urban. Let's see which of the following statements are correct. Both the statements are correct. Let's look at the explanation. Why is this important? In the Independence Day speech, Prime Minister mentioned that the growth rate of the country's population has been falling since 1971. As you can see in this graph, the growth rate peaked between 1961 and 1971. From then it has been falling. It also says that the total fertility rate in rural areas is higher than in urban areas. This is urban, this is rural. And in rural areas, this decline is faster compared to the urban areas. In state-wise analysis, Jammu Kashmir and Delhi registered the biggest drop in total fertility rate, while Kerala and Tamil Nadu showed no change because they have already stabilized their population. As you can see, the bigger the circle, the bigger the fertility rate. UP enjoys a biggest fertility rate, which is followed by Bihar, Maharashtra, etc. As you can see, the population change, that is increase in population, was the highest in Bihar and lowest in Kerala. The population increase is almost 25% increase in Bihar, whereas in Kerala it is only near to 5%. If you see this part of the graph in this side, here though there is high decrease over the years, TFR has remained high in these states. That is, total fertility rate is higher in Assam, Gujarat and Bihar. What is total fertility rate? This is a point where the population exactly replaces the numbers from one generation to another generation. The same number it should replace. That is called as total fertility rate. Kindly pause the video and have a look at this image to understand more about this population change. Let's move on to the next one. This question is from Art and Culture. In India, the guidelines for declaring a language as classical language. What are the guidelines? As we know, India has 6 classical languages. The question asks, what are the guidelines to declare a language as classical language? High antiquity of its early texts, recorded history over a period of 1500 to 2000 years old. Now, second statement, literary tradition must be original and not borrowed from another speech community. The third one, there should not be any discontinuity between the classical language and its later forms or offshoots. Let's see which of the statements are correct. Answer is 1 and 2 only, because there is a leeway which says there can be discontinuity between the classical language and its later forms. Let's look at the explanation. Currently we have 6 languages that enjoy classical language status. These are Tamil, Sanskrit, Kannada, Telugu, Malayalam and Odia. The first language to be declared as classical is Tamil. The latest language to be declared as classical is Odia. Remember this fact. Now, according to the information provided by Ministry of Culture, the guidelines for declaring a language as classical are, it should have high antiquity. That means it should have texts and recorded history over a period of 1500 to 2000 years old. And then the ancient literature or text should be considered as a valuable heritage by generation of speakers. The third one, literary tradition should be original and it should not be borrowed from another speech community. The last statement says, classical language and literature being distinct from modern, there can also be a discontinuity between the classical language and its later form, meaning the way it is spoken, it can be different from how it was spoken in the earlier times and how it is now. Let's move on. HRD Ministry in its reply to a starred question said that what are the benefits of being a classical language? It said that 2 major annual international awards for scholars of eminence will be issued for the languages which are declared as classical, and then a Center of Excellence for Studies in Classical Language is also a setup, and UGC University Grants Commission is requested to create and start with, at least in the central universities, a certain number of professional chairs for the classical languages. These are the benefits these 6 classical languages now enjoy. Let's move on to the next question. This question is from the Important Government Schemes chapter. Consider the following statement regarding National Economic Census. This National Economic Census is conducted once in every 10 years and it is crucial for framing policies and planning for the government and other organizations. Let's see. The next statement says, 7th Economic Census of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation was launched. For the first time, the entire census is being conducted on a digital platform by the use of an application. This statement might be true because the government is pushing more towards digital India. Therefore, this could be true. Let's look at the answer. The answer is 2 and 3 only, because this national economic census is held every 5 years once. Unlike the population census, which happens every 10 years, this economic census happens every 5 years. Let's look at the explanation. Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has tied up with Common Service Centers Network. This is a special purpose vehicle under MeitY, as we have seen Common Service Centers, CSCs, and Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has conducted National Economic Census. For the first time, the entire census is being conducted on a digital platform by use of an application. Why is this done? To ensure high accuracy and data security. Initially, we do it only manual way. Now, as we are moving towards more of digital world, this census is conducted in a digital platform. National Economic Census is conducted every 5 years. And this is crucial for framing policies and planning for the government and other organizations. Let's move on. The process of economic census was first started in 1978. Therefore, this becomes the 7th census. Remember this. This economic census is 7th. This will provide disaggregated information on various operational and structural aspects of all the establishments in country. This is very important to form the economic policy, and this is important for the private players, investment, etc. Therefore, this census becomes very important. This will provide a valuable insights into geographical spread and clusters of economic activities, meaning why one economic activity is concentrated in that state only. This census will help us understand that. And ownership pattern and persons engaged of the establishment. Here establishment, they mean industries. Let's move on to the last question for this session. Consider the following statements. India is the largest producer and consumer of silk in the world. India is the only country in the world that produces all 5 varieties of silk on a commercial scale. Last statement says Central Silk Board has initiated Silk Samagra program to empower downtrodden, poor and backward tribal families through various activities of sericulture. You know, sericulture is silk production, rearing of silk, silkworms, etc. Let's see which of the following statements are correct. Only 2 and 3 is correct, because India, yes, it is the largest consumer of silk, but this is not the largest producer. From ancient times, China has been the largest producer. Let's look at the explanation. India is the 2nd largest producer of silk after China. As you have seen, China's Silk Road initiative, etc. So you can associate easily silk of being discovered and being spread to the entire world by China. Next one, India is the largest consumer of silk in the world. This is true. Next one, it is the only country in the world that produces all 5 varieties of silk. What are these 5 varieties? Mulberry, oak tassar silk, tropical tassar silk, muga and eri. India holds the global monopoly for the production in the muga silk. In this 5 varieties of silk, India dominates the world production in the muga silk variety. Let's know more about the Silk Samagra program. This is initiated by the Central Silk Board. It comprises major 4 components: R&D, training, transfer of technology and information technology initiatives, seed organizations and coordination and market development. This also includes quality certification system and the export ban, promotion and technology upgradation. These are the 4 major components of the Silk Samagra program. That is research, seed organizations, market, developing a market, because ultimately you need market for any product to thrive, and then quality certification and export promotion. These are the 4 components. Moving on, the major objective of the scheme is to maintain breeders' stock, improvement through R&D projects, mechanized practices, latest technology involvement through sericulture, information linkages and knowledge system. It is also called as Silk's portal. Sericulture, information linkages and knowledge system. Silk's portal and mobile app for seed quality monitoring, etc. What is this main aim of Silk Samagra scheme? To empower the downtrodden, poor and backward tribal families, because sericulture, it can be performed by even the poor people and it ensures high returns. Therefore, the poor and backward tribal families, including women, are the main targets of this scheme, and this scheme aims to uplift them. That's all for today's class, students. I hope this class was informative and useful. Kindly follow us for more such videos. Thank you.